Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cactus Lounge. I am Donna Reed, and I traveled and up with people in 1976. And this morning, my guest is Ryan. Ryan, how do you say your last name?
Deco, Ryan
Dekoe.
Deco. Yeah.
Okay, just what it looks like. So, Ryan, tell everybody. Clearly, you're sitting someplace where it's colder than where I am in Arizona. Where you're sitting, and when you traveled and up with people.
So it's not supposed to be like this. I'm in Poughkeepsie, New York, and it's unseasonably cold here. I sent my kid to school with a jacket this morning. So yeah, I traveled in C95, 96.
C95, 96. Okay.
Yeah. You
Okay.
traveled the year after I was born.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder. Yeah. I think I mentioned yeah, how old I feel in doing some of these or whatever. But it's nice to know I interviewed people that traveled before me too. So
Did
yeah.
you have the swing claps?
Oh yeah.
Of
Oh yeah.
course.
Yeah.
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 Can never get rid of the swing
Many
claps.
versions of Up with People.
I was
Exactly.
so happy that I was the drummer that I really never had to
You didn't have
participate
to
in
do
swing
that.
clapping. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, are you from New York originally? Is that where you maybe saw a show? Where did you first learn about Up with People?
So I'm originally from Bristol, Connecticut,
Okay,
and I just recently moved here for a job, but I lived in Bristol and then after Up With People moved around, but moved back to Bristol, which was a huge Up With People community back in the 80s and early 90s. It was always a United Way fundraiser that they were
oh,
working with. And so they would come like clockwork every single year. And I don't know, I think my mom got involved with it through the Bristol Hospital. She worked at the hospital and they were sort of like a sub sponsor. And
okay.
they somebody came in and asked for host families, and that's how I was exposed to it and
Yeah.
saw my first show. And when you have that, I had no idea what it was, but I knew the person staying in my house. Like,
Okay,
oh, okay, like, and
that's what
so
I
I
wondered.
had,
So you were a host family. You're
yeah,
yeah.
and you had that connection of like, oh, that's them, because I was so
Yeah.
young. I think I was
To
11,
see that
12.
person on stage. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. So how old were you, do you think, when you saw that first
So
show?
I was in sixth grade.
Sixth. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And then in seventh and eighth grade, we hosted drummers. And I had never played drums. I was into like piano and music and loved music, but we hosted the drummer. I can't remember his name. I can't believe that I can't, but he was from Las Vegas. And the next guy was German. And I just fell in love with the whole I they were the reasons I started playing drums.
Oh, that's
I fell in love.
interesting.
They brought me to like the cast to check it out backstage, and I thought I was like with rock stars. Like um,
Of course, at that age, getting to go backstage and stuff like that, that's funny. That's funny.
yeah. Well,
So,
even when I was in Up With People and had been backstage and on stage so many times, there's just sort of this mystical kind of feeling that you get, and especially if you're into theater,
yeah,
like
yeah.
those, like it's always just been a magical place, and the magic never went away, by the way. Like every time I stepped on that stage, it was magical,
Yeah.
in a tiring way, but magical.
Yeah. So did you then apply when you were like a senior in high school or did you go to college or when did you apply to be
No,
with people?
right after high school, I interviewed with. It was my junior year,
Okay.
and then because I was older, so I was able to apply and get in, but then had to defer a year because I still had my senior year to go.
Got it. Okay. Okay. So you were older in your class, not older and up with people per se.
That's right. I was
Yeah.
only 20 when I traveled.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so you joined and then were you hired as a drummer? I mean, when you came to Up With People, you were drumming right from the get-go? No? Okay.
So it was. Let me tell you, there was the drummers that they were split up over the different casts, so each cast could have a drummer or two. And there was another guy who was in my cast. His name was Marcus, and he was a phenomenal drummer. He had this kind of like laid back Latin feel, that I just didn't have. I was kind of more of a rock drummer,
Yeah.
and we sort of had to battle it out for the position of being the drummer. I remember working with Pat Murphy, and he would, be like, "It's really close, guys," and he gave us the medley to learn and come back the next day. And the way that I always learned music was listening and memorizing, and I didn't really need the music as much. And I kind of pulled a power move and put the music on the floor and did it by memory. And I remember Pat Murphy taking us both for a long walk, and he was so serious about it. And it was like, but it added to the, like I felt like I accomplished something. But he took us both on a walk and he's like, "Hey, Ryan, you got the lead drummer part." And it was very dramatic at the time, it was, but that
No,
was,
it's funny. And Pat was here for Mr. Belk's 100th birthday, and there was a few of us that were hanging out after the next day. People kind of came and went that were the old school people, so it was fun to
yeah.
see him and stuff. And I know I sent you some videos to watch. Did you by any chance watch the one where I interviewed the Arizona band?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Since you mentioned Pat, I wondered. So that was fun. There's several groups that are like bands of brothers, left for various reasons in various ways. Sometimes it's music, sometimes it's golf, but
Yeah.
it's interesting the
Yeah.
relationships that have stayed together.
I'm
So
sorry about my dogs. That's just what they do.
where'd your tour take you?
So we went through, we started out in Nebraska and then did again, like I had done some traveling, but when you drive from the longest points in Nebraska that you can get through, not even the long way, the diagonal way,
Diagonally, yeah.
our first bus ride after the Nebraska show was like 14 hours. And I remember thinking like, what is going on? So we did a little bit of the Midwest, Wisconsin, up into Canada, and then down to Florida. And our tour originally was supposed to be something different than it ended up being. I don't remember what it was, but there was a point where if you ask people that were in Up With People post like 95, 96, Cast C95, 96 is a very nefarious reputation. I think we had a lot of strong personalities in the cast that drove it in a lot of different ways that I think Up With People wasn't used to, so, and this is just from feedback that I had gotten,
There's
through.
one of those every year, and sometimes there's two or three. And it takes the cast managers and those who did it for a lot of years to be like, oh yeah, that was that cast. It's funny. Um, and, and
So
and so I've seen some of that through the years.
that was us. That
Okay.
was us. We didn't know it at the time.
Right.
And I only found out afterwards, like, oh, really? Everything wasn't like that? And then when I went to fill in with other casts as a drummer, it
Yeah.
wasn't. It was very, very, very different. A lot like people were more, but also it was where we were. I think like 95, 96 was like, it was still grungy and a little bit like depressed. And, like we were just products of that sort of time in history where we questioned everything.
Yeah.
But anyway, we would have to have a lot of cast C meetings about, you know, our our attitudes in general, and the staff used it to their advantage. We were called into a gymnasium of some venue that we were at, and the stern faces of the managers and
Yeah.
everyone seemed really upset with us. And we were like, "Oh, here we go again." Like we're just gonna have to listen to how horrible we are. And it wasn't that dramatic, of course, but
Right.
they ended up by starting out very dramatically and then took off their shirts, and they had undershirts that were Venezuela. Each one had a different letter. And they announced that we were taking the tour to Venezuela instead of where we had been scheduled to go.
Oh,
And
interesting
so
and
that
fun.
it was like a plot twist, you
Yeah.
know. But apparently, no cast had been there since the late 70s.
That's
And
true. That was so in 76, 77. We were the bicentennial tour, which meant that we were the finishing of the bicentennial tour. And it meant that we went a lot of places in the States, and my cast only went to Mexico. and another cast only went to Canada, and a cast went to Venezuela.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, the generations were still into Up with People, even as 20 years later, because those, I
Yeah.
think the kids of the people that saw it and the people that saw it were still there,
Yeah.
So when we got there, there was billboards for us, and I remember leaving cities where they would drive after us in cars and waving and screaming like we were, and we did feel like rock stars because we were
Oh,
playing the biggest venues. We went from like the small theaters of the high schools of North America to
too
soccer
big.
fields,
Yes.
and it was
That's the way
it was
Mexico City was for us. It was the same way. Yeah. We did every town in Texas that I think you possibly could go to. And then the next thing you know, we're in this stadium in Mexico City. So I think that that's kind of a common thing that happened. And interestingly, for me, having a son that traveled in 2013, you and I had a little bit of chit chat about this with your son, the age he is. Um, it was a 6 month tour, and they went to a city for a week versus us coming in, getting there at night, rehearsing the next day, maybe performing somewhere, and then leaving and the turning that went with our tour compared to the 2000s and what we got to know about places or what we didn't. But I think that the experience of performing, whether it be in a very small place, in a high school gym, or in a stadium, yeah, you can hear that all through the years. What is it like? What was it like? And I also think that at some level, we were a little like lemmings. We just did what we did. They were like, go do this. And you're like, okay. And the person in charge of you was only 4 or 5 years older than you, maybe. Maybe
yeah,
they're younger than you. So
yeah,
when you look back and you think about that staff having meetings with you or choosing who's going to play the drums or whatever, we're not talking people with 15 years of work experience. We're talking other alumni who have, worked through these ranks and had to make those decisions for 18 and 19-year-olds, right?
yeah.
You know,
And when you're in it, you don't think of them that way,
no,
because
they're the bosses.
they're kind of they are, and it
Yeah.
was it was not until much later into my year that I even got to know some of my staff members, because a lot of times they weren't in host families with you, or they were
No, they might have
just
been in hotels or, yeah,
yeah, and they
yeah.
were also very like I spent a lot of time with my band leader, of course, and he ended up moving in with me when I moved to Boston after my student year. So we
Okay.
got to be very close,
Yeah,
and that was a kindred thing for music. It was
of
just,
course.
you love music so much,
That
and
connection. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. One of the when you had touched upon how your son had stayed longer, I remember in our cast, one of the things that the staff, and I remember talking about it, the staff asked, what would you do to change Up with People? And that was one of our um, biggest suggestions, was that we stay longer in places, because although we did have those, I remember there being a stretch very much in the beginning where I felt like I didn't really sign up for this. It was travel, show, travel,
Hmm.
and then maybe a free day or a hastily put together community service because you were only in that city for a day, and then travel, and it just seems so, because the big point was for me the host families and the
Right.
learning about their
Where you
like
were.
the points of right, and I felt like in the beginning, and I think a lot of people felt that way in the beginning, it was just too much of a fast paced kind of thing, and like slow it down, because the times it was slow were the times where your host family would take you to their favorite restaurant, their favorite place to swim, and their favorite
Right.
kinds of foods that you didn't get to. Sometimes it was like a sleepover with
Oh,
a
yeah.
random family, in some strange bed. But other times you got so close to these people, and you learned so much from them, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that that's one of the things when I have spoken with people more recently. So when I started these, we Up with People was still existing and they were playing with the format, and we don't know what the future holds. We know there's a board of directors. We know that there's still money there and bills and things. But there's also so many options for, people can go couch surfing and home exchanges, and I don't know post-COVID if people will ever open their homes up like they did. Oh, sure, I'm going to have three strangers come stay at my house for a few days or a week or whatever it is, in Tucson for 6 weeks or a month when, we were staging. So that
Yeah.
definitely was part and parcel of what we learned. And I think for me, it's part of the reason that when I still travel, I like to stay with people. I can go to a hotel and then it's me by myself in the hotel, maybe eating breakfast in the hotel or lunch if they're, and what have I learned about the city? Nothing.
Right.
And yeah, I would rather know the stories going through. So we the reason that you're here today is because of a post that you put on Facebook. Did you put it in the alumni page, or do you remember where you posted what you wrote? Was
I
that on
just
your
put it on
personal
my
page?
personal
It
page.
was okay. And since then, since we become friends on Facebook, I can see you write a lot. You tell a lot of stories, you know.
Yeah.
But that post has been shared a lot by alumni because it really seemed to strike a chord encompassing what we experienced. And you started it out by saying, people ask me, and here we are for me, 50 years next year, 50 years later, with what percentage of the world has no idea who we are and what we did?
Yeah.
With about 23,000 alumni globally, when you think about the fact that a college can graduate 10,000 kids in a year, you
Yeah.
know, we had such a unique experience. So tell me, tell me what prompted you to write that. Was it just because somebody did say again to you, Ryan, what is this Up with People thing, or what happened?
So it was somebody that I used to work with that must have been looking on my profile or through pictures, and I have a whole section from Up with People there.
Okay.
And they wrote me just randomly on Facebook and was like, "Hey, I didn't know you were in Up with People." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I was. I played the drums." And the first thing they said was, "Isn't that a cult?" And this is not somebody I've known really like, and they weren't being rude. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
don't think because they were confused as why I would put pictures of me being in a cult. You know what I
right.
mean? They just didn't understand.
Right.
Like why? Yeah,
Don't put
exactly.
your cult pictures online.
And my response was a very abbreviated version of what I had written on Facebook. But I've had 30 years of reflection to think about what it meant to me. And I remember them saying that, even at maybe not 30 years, but I remember them saying, "You're not going to know what the hell this was about for a while, you
Hmm.
know?"
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I didn't. And I really, when I was invited back to be the drummer, is when I really sort of figured it out. In the other cast that I was in, I realized that I didn't appreciate what I had as much as I should have in my student year. I was young. I was I was a different man. You know what I mean? I was coming from a very lily white Connecticut white picket fence kind of upbringing, and that influences you in so many ways. I went to Catholic, all of these things that I was raised to believe Up with People challenged, and it took me a long time to process.
So that was something that I was going to ask. I was going to ask about where you came from because I came from a town settled by nine German brothers. And we had migrant workers, a few Hispanics, and one black kid.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and for me when I joined, I thought everybody's going to come from a family where they're married and they get along and all those things. So you just answered a part of that question. And so
You know
did
what,
you
Donna? More
what?
than anything, it was being American. I didn't realize, just we're taught World War II, we saved the world.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be an American. Everyone thought the streets were paved with gold. Be
Yeah.
proud to be an American.
Yep.
And I remember getting there, and the Europeans were just like, calm down. Like you're really not the best. And we would be like, what are you talking about? This is what we were, we
Who do
are the
you think
best.
you
And we were,
are?
and we were the loudest, we were the most brash. And a lot of times we had a lot of the big roles in the
The
production
show.
because we were so confident and we were so,
Mm.
theatrical. And I remember that being the biggest challenge to my personal ethos, if you will, or the way that I was brought up, was that there's a lot other things out there besides American, and
Yeah.
I learned humility through that.
Yeah. Um, the loudness is interesting because I do think, although I have to say and I'm just going to say this, with what's happening in our world right now, I think that every American's voice is a little diminished about everything. And
It depends
um,
on which side you're on, Donna.
well, that's true. That's true. But I think that for for me, also coming from a similar background, I don't know that I had real expectations. And we, again, bicentennial, we had like 8 non-Americans. We didn't have anything like the later casts or certain casts had because it had been in the United States for the first half of the bicentennial, and then we were finishing it up. So people that we're interviewing I'm from a town of 600 people. I would not have seen a show if they hadn't been doing small town America during the bicentennial. So
Oh, I see. Yeah.
so for me, and that's when they took 150 people and they divided them into groups of 50 to hit other places. So so the following year, then we have, the international, and they were only 6 or 7. We used to make up people from different countries just, to wave on stage. But what it did for me is it opened up my interest in the rest of the world. It wasn't like I wasn't already a little interested, but like you're like, oh, there's this whole other thing that I'm not aware of,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And you wrote about that. And so what did you stay in touch through the years? Is your cast close? Are there close friends? What's your current relationship with your cast or other drummers or whatever?
So I moved in with my band leader and the acoustic guitar player from the band.
Okay.
His name was Mike, and him and I were of like-minded musically, and we were absolutely in love with harmonies, and we happened to sing and harmonize very well together. So we spent a lot of time on the road together, writing and playing and rehearsing just for us. So after Up With People, I moved to Boston with two Up With People,
Okay.
and even though social media sort of was coming online at the end of that, there
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of communication for the first 10 years. And I think by the time we were done with Portugal, which was the last city of our tour,
Okay.
I think a lot of us were ready to move on with our lives. We wanted to take this knowledge that we had just gained in this experience and apply it to a career, apply it to a family, apply it to having kids. And it wasn't until really the last, I think, 15 years or so that people have started to reconnect more
Hmm.
because a lot of that is getting old, what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like having that career is like, okay, I've been doing this for 10 years, and your mind always goes back to, when you're in a business meeting or something, and one of the things they taught us was keep your eye on the ball, and they had a whole
yeah.
sort of
Carolyn
presentation
Lee.
about keep your eye on the ball. But these little things pop in your head for the rest of your life because of that one intense year. And I think as we've gotten older, we all of us have started to reconnect a little bit more with each other from the cast because we realize more now, I think, that that was such a trend. We knew it the entire time, but you get busy with life, you know what I mean? And that's one of the reasons why I didn't write anything down for 30 years, because I was busy with life, you know?
Yeah.
Recently, I was a radio morning show guy on a radio station and got let go for corporate like budget cuts. So
Mm,
I've had, instead of thinking about, oh, I should write about up with people, I actually took the time to do it because I had the time and I could really think about all of those things that I've been thinking about for 30 years, you know?
right. 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 So did you, leaving up with people, did you move to Poughkeepsie for the radio job and what? No? Okay.
So no, I lived in Connecticut for a while, but continued on performing. I did a comedy variety show with juggling and fire eating and yeah,
Your
whip
beard fits
tricks.
right into that, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So and I had been doing that prior, like as a hobby, and then did it full time for about 20 years.
Wow.
Um, we traveled. We worked a lot in Mexico at all-inclusive resorts at this, basically like a cruise ship on the land. You know,
Right,
they
right,
have
right.
these
Oh,
beautiful theaters, and we did fairs and festivals and Ren fairs and corporate events and a lot of colleges. We did the college circuit for a while.
wow.
So yeah, we did a lot of traveling and a lot of performing, just sort of continuing that life that I absolutely fell in love with in Up with People. You know, like I loved traveling around, and you know, I was thinking prior to this, one of the things that I had sort of forgotten about was that feeling of riding in the bus, coming into a town, not knowing who your host family was, and you could sort of, oh, I wonder, you know, are they going to be like this family or what? And then you're completely surprised every single time, sometimes pleasantly and sometimes not so pleasantly, you know. But
Yeah.
so after touring, both my partner and I that I had toured with had kids pretty much simultaneously. So
Okay.
my son's 11, and we wanted to get off the road and actually be dads, you
Yeah.
know. So I got into radio at that point, and he went on to sell solar. But I've been basically dadding it up for 11 years doing the radio stuff.
Yeah.
And recently, with losing my job, I don't want to start getting philosophical or anything, but I can't believe that I gave somebody or a corporation, an entity, so much power over my life. You know, like having done something for 20 years, you know, as a real estate agent, you're doing it yourself. So every success and every failure is based on
Yours.
you. I left my livelihood in the hands of somebody else that didn't care about it as much as me,
Yeah.
you know? And one day I had a great show. We were called into the office and said, we're $1 million over budget. We have to cut the budget. We're going to have to let you go. And there was no
Wow.
time to prepare. There was no nothing. It was just, you're done. And that
Wow.
made me think a lot about what I want to do for my next steps. I'm not
Yeah.
sure I want to hand over my life like that again to somebody that really doesn't care.
There are such pros and cons to that because as a realtor, you have the right, you still have to let the broker has to hire you and agree to hire you, and you have to abide by rules. But right now it's 10 in the morning and I'm at home and I can do this Zoom call with you and schedule my life around it, right? Um, and simultaneously, nobody can tell me you're done tomorrow unless I totally violate, ethics things. And I never know when I'm going to get a paycheck.
Yeah,
So, and nobody's putting money into a 401k for me. So definitely, and I did that. I did corporate America and everything. And sometimes when realtors get upset about what's happening at the higher level, and I can be one of them because the older I get, the more opinionated I am. But at the end of the day, nobody that owned the companies I worked for asked me what they were going to do when they made changes, just like you. They didn't come and go, Ryan, what do you think?
yeah.
You know?
No,
Yeah.
no, you're just done.
Yeah. So you think you'll stay in Poughkeepsie?
No, I'm out of here. As
Okay.
as soon as I can get out of here. Like there's been a lot of noise here just because like there is no, so I'm in a big brick building, so if I go farther away I don't have good internet. So I've
Okay.
got to be near where the internet is, which is near the street, which is not very quiet, and I'm
Well,
sure
I'm
you.
not hearing anything, so just so you know,
Okay,
I'm not hearing any
I'm
outside.
hearing everything. As
Yeah.
the yeah. So
Yeah.
no, I want to be
Yeah.
I want to be done. My
Yeah.
son is going to be finished with fifth grade. He's the only reason I stayed
To finish
here.
the school
If it was
year.
by myself, I would have been out and
Yeah.
I would have been backpacking through Europe, visiting up with people friends. You know what I mean? Like you just
All right.
can't do that with an 11-year
All
old.
right. So as we wrap this up, because you had told me that if Up with People was around, you would love for your son be able to experience it. So what
Yeah,
do you think that you can advise this? What'd you say he's 11? Is that what you
yeah.
said? 11, this 11-year-old, as he looks to the future in a world that you didn't have. You didn't have the whole, oh, you should go see the world and learn from everybody. Now you have that. What will you tell your son?
I would tell my son, no matter. I mean, the biggest rule. I shouldn't say rule, but the biggest thing that I took away from Up with People was what I would want to instill into him, which is step out of your comfort zone.
Mm,
Always step out of your comfort zone. If you don't like being on stage, be on stage. If you don't like what somebody is politically saying to you, don't necessarily vote the way they are, but figure out why they're trying, why they think that way. You
hmm
know, like the same with cultural things. You know, like if you don't understand a cultural thing, step out of your comfort zone and try to figure it out. And if you're always asking why from a point of stepping out of your comfort zone, I think you're always going to be bettering yourself. And that's all I want for him is to be. I tell him this all the time, and maybe I shouldn't tell this to an 11-year-old kid, but I say, I'm proud of you because you're not an asshole. And that, as a parent, like I've already won. You know, there's nothing if he was an asshole, there's nothing I could do to change that now. But he's not. He's a very empathetic, like open minded kid and that's really all I care about. But I always tell him to step out of it. I don't want to do that. Well,
Yeah.
like maybe you should think about doing that. But whatever it is, whether it's a physical thing or a mental thing, step out of your comfort zone and you're going to grow. You're going to keep on growing for the
Yeah.
rest of your life thinking like that, you know?
I'm going to share one thing and then I got to wrap it up. So my family, my mom's family was Swedish, and I can remember all the Christmases that we went to in Chicago and the foods that they would eat and things that they would have. And I spent a lifetime not liking herring, and I had never tasted herring. And so in 2015, there was a reunion that took place for Midsummer with, I think there was 82 or 92 of us from 84. It was an 84 cast that started it. And I had three kinds of herring at Midsummer. And I was like, this isn't that bad.
That's
But it
right.
so stepping up. I had just decided there was no way I was going to eat that fish as a
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah.
And who are you people like you relatives kind of thing. So that's great advice. I'll I
Up with Up with People changed the way that I eat. Because when I went to Europe, I did the American thing where I put my hand on my lap and then constantly switching the
yeah,
fork and the
yeah.
knife. And I remember a host dad saying, "What are you doing? Like, why are you doing that?" I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't make. You're right. It doesn't make
I only
sense.
do it when
You
I'm
know.
there, Ryan. I still do the whole American thing when I'm home, but when I'm there, I watch them and they balance peas on an upside down fork. And I'm like,
So that's the only issue that I have with the whole process is the upside down fork thing. It's just listen, flip your fork and make it eat. I understand not switching your fork and knife all the time.
yeah,
Just
yeah.
just flip the fork. Come on. Come on.
Funny, funny.
But really, those from the little things of like
Yeah,
stepping out of your comfort zone for me has been like how Up with People completely changed my life. And I think that's why I want to send my son to something like that, but there's not really anything going on, like
yeah, yeah. All right. Thank you for joining me. I will let you know when I make it live in the Cactus Lounge. And
sure.
if and I post it if I can on the EAM site, and post it in the alumni site, and then it gets moved to the alumni webpage. But if you share it, it's more people that see it, and sometimes friends who don't know about Up with People. So thank you.
I'll share it for sure.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for your time. I'm gonna
Thanks, Donna.
pause or stop.